Hello, how have you been? In part one of cultural studies, if you've seen it, we spoke about what is culture, followed by the birth of cultural studies, spoke about scholars like Raymond Williams, Richard Hogarth, E.P. Thompson, Stuart Hall. Watch part one and then come here. Today, we start with the Marxist foundation of cultural studies. I'm so excited to let this course going. Listen now. What is Marxism? Many students assume that Marxism only studies economics or class struggle. Of course, that is true, but that is partially true. Look, classical Marxism definitely emphasized the relationship between economics and society, but 20th century thinkers gradually realized that economic power alone cannot explain how a society functions. Why? See, the government cannot rely only on force every single day. You cannot let policemen stand on every nook and corner of the city. You cannot uh, give physical force everywhere so that the law and order is followed. Every police officer cannot be standing inside a classroom or newspaper office, television studio, family. So the question is, how does power sustain itself? The answer, cultural studies says, lies in culture. This is going to be very interesting. Look, culture, when I give birth to a child, I'm saying it because I'm a mommy. I want that my child should be ethical. I want my child should be culturally aware. Therefore, I imbibe in my child certain beliefs, ideas, values, and common sense. I try to teach my child what is normal, what is desirable, what is patriotic, what is beautiful, what is considered success, right? And therefore, cultural studies draw so heavily upon three major Marxist traditions. What are these three major Marxist traditions? First is Antonio Gramsci's theory of hegemony. Second is Louis Althusser's theory of ideology. And third is Frankfurt School's critique of the culture industry. And I'm going to teach you all this in this lecture. Let's start with hegemony. What is hegemony? Antonio Gramsci was an Italian Marxist philosopher who wrote during the early 20th century. He was imprisoned by the fascist regime of Mussolini, and it was Gramsci who wrote what later came to be known as prison notebooks. Please connected with this that Gramsci was imprisoned and therefore he wrote prison notebooks, which became a very, very influential political text of the 20th century. But other than prison notebooks, what Gramsci is known for today, that is the concept of hegemony. What it is. Hegemony is leadership through consent rather than domination through force. When I willingly accept someone as God, when I willingly accept someone as the leader, when I willingly accept the rules to be normal, when I willingly say, yes, this is wrong, that is right, willingly I accept those in power, that is hegemony. Yes. What does Gramsci say? He said that ruling class does not rely only on power, okay? Does not rely only on military force or wealth. In fact, this ruling class remains powerful because people voluntarily accept its views. And this voluntary acceptance is what Gramsci calls hegemony. People start believing that the existential social arrangements are common sense. They start believing it to be the order of the day, right? And that is why cultural studies pays such close attention to films, televisions, newspapers, advertisements, education, religion, popular culture. That is the ruling class trying to put an ideology in the minds of the people. I'll give you a very good example. These days, we have started watching the movies of 90s with our kids. So my kids who literally are born in 2000s, for them these 90s films are not at all extravagant. But when I saw the other day, I saw the heroine, like literally Kajol, was in a swimsuit. And my husband started telling me that for people then, this was a revolution. Okay, movies start showing you something which might not be true, but they start putting it in your head, saying that it is okay. It is okay to expose. It is okay to live like this. And that is how the ruling class works. It tries to put in your mind certain ideas, saying that it is okay to act like this. And that is the reason for Gramsci, popular culture becomes a site of struggle. Popular culture is where ideologies are reproduced. But let me tell you, popular culture is where these ideologies can be questioned also. Don't only think of the cons, think of the pros also. Because of movies like, you can say movies that are patriotic. We get the ideology that yes, we are Indians, we are proud to be Indian. Because of movies that have fought against the system. Yes, Gen Z protested at Jantar Mantar. So, therefore, this popular culture, which becomes a site where the ruling class wants to promote an ideology, can also become a site where it can be questioned, negotiated, and resisted, right? And this insight influenced Stuart Hall and the Birmingham School. Okay, let's move on now. Another concept by Gramsci is called organic intellectuals. He introduced this concept of organic intellectual. Who is an organic intellectual? Please tell me. A person who emerges from within a particular social group, a person who articulates the experiences, struggles, and aspirations of that social group, somebody who is not detached from ordinary society. In fact, he's a product of that society. Every social class produces its own intellectuals, and they are the ones that are called organic intellectuals. These organic intellectuals remain deeply rooted or connected to the communities from which they arise. Example, the Dalit community, writers who have written about Dalits, they still want to talk about the trauma. They want to speak about the upliftment of the backward communities. Yes, they are organic intellectuals who have risen from their own background and community, right? Now listen to this memory hook for UGC net, very important. Whenever you think of Antonio Gramsci, remember only one sentence, which is power survives because people consent to it. People accept to it willingly, not merely because they fear it, and that is hegemony. The next way of Marxism influence on cultural studies is shown through Louis Althusser and his concept of ideology and the making of subjects. Who was Louis Althusser? He was a French Marxist philosopher. He explained how ideology produces individuals who willingly participate in the system. Look, many students think that ideology simply means a political opinion. For me, I am a strong supporter of one political party. That is my ideology because my ideology matches with the ideology of that political party. So, for people, ideology is limited only to politics? No. Louis Althusser said that ideology is much broader. It is an entire network of beliefs, assumptions, values, practices through which individuals understand themselves as well as the world. Now, Althusser says that there are two ways by which state maintains power. You know, what are these two ways by which any state or the ruling party, the ruling class maintains power? It's RSA and ISA. RSA stands for repressive state apparatuses. ISA stands for ideological state apparatuses. Will you remember? First, talk about repressive state apparatuses. This definitely is the primary, machinery by which the ruling class is in power. For example, police, military, courts, prison, judiciary, you know there are so many laws which will tell that whether this person will be executed or not. That is RSA. There are laws that will depict will this person go to prison or not. That is RSA, repressive state apparatuses. Now, opposite to this is ideological state apparatuses. As I told you, every gully cannot have police. Therefore, modern societies depend far more heavily on another mechanism, which is called ISA, where ideology works through persuasion. For example, schools. Oh God, children learn maximum of their beliefs in schools. And therefore we say that अच्छी टीचर मिल गई तो children पार लग जाएंगे नहीं तो सब गलत. Schools, universities, religion. Why there are so many occult practices or occult religious practices? People fall into it. People believe into it. That is ISA, ideological state apparatuses. How you are persuaded to believe into an ideology by any religious institution. Your family is also an example of ISA. Media, literature, cinema, television, popular culture, all these are examples of ISAs because these institutions teach people how to behave, what to value, what to believe in. And therefore, this ideology, this ISA is so very effective. It operates invisibly. RSA operates visibly, ISA operates invisibly. Lovely. Another of Althuser's concept is interpellation. Hey, you. Remember interpellation with hey, you. I'll tell you now. Look, you're walking down a street, a police officer shouts, hey, you. Almost instinctively, you turn around. That's not your name. Hey, you is not your name, but you turn around, right? So, interpellation is this being hailed or called into a social identity. Yes? According to Althusser, ideology functions exactly in the same way. Please now listen. From childhood, I tell my child, you're such a good student. You're such a good human being. You will be a responsible citizen. Oh, you are my son. And then I tell my daughter, you are stupid. You're good for nothing. You're my daughter, but why are you my daughter? I tell somebody, another person, you're a consumer. Oh, you're so unethical. I tell someone else, you're a patriot. I am trying to internalize their identities. I am trying to mold their identities into them, interpolate it. I begin myself to categorize myself like a good person or a bad person by the way the society treats me. If my mother has taught me since my childhood, you're stupid, it has entered my brain. And even till now, I will believe I am stupid. That is how I was hailed, you know. But if from my childhood I was given confidence and said, oh God, you're a girl full of, zeal, you can achieve whatever you want to in life. And that interpellation gave me confidence. Wow. And now, the third way in Marxist cultural study is what Frankfurt School showed us, the culture industry. Can you please connect the culture industry with the Frankfurt School? Final Marxist influence comes from the Frankfurt School. This group includes many thinkers, but because it's a crash course, I will talk about two major thinkers connected with the Frankfurt School. Their names are Adorno and Horkheimer. You'll always listen to these surnames together. A.H. Adorno and Horkheimer. Their complete names are Theodor Adorno and Max Horkheimer. Their landmark work was Dialectic of Enlightenment, which was published in the year 1944. And this book, Dialectic of Enlightenment, introduced the culture industry. What is culture industry? Horkheimer and Adorno said that under capitalism, culture itself becomes an industrial product. Obviously, today the entire film industry, television industry, music industry, radios, FMs, magazines, advertisements, what are these? These are industrial products of culture. Everything becomes mass produced according to commercial formulas. Consumers believe that they are exercising freedom of choice, but nah. My husband loves to read The Economist and he thinks that he's building an ideology. He says that The Economist researches before writing about any illness or any topic around the world. But who knows that the editors behind The Economist are actually working to put certain ideology into your brain. That is the culture industry. I don't tell this to my husband, but I'm telling you, he's getting biased in one sense by reading The Economist. But, Adorno and Horkheimer continue that the choices often are remarkably similar. That is, there are different products, different packaging, but same underlying patterns. All the products these days, like, Boost or Horlicks, they say that this has so much energy that your child will grow. There is different product name, different packaging, but they're trying to sell it to you in similar manner that it is very helpful for your child. That's not the case, right? So popular entertainment does not truly entertain. It actually pacifies, distracts, and standardizes tastes. In reality, popular entertainment discourages critical thinking, and this process actually helps in maintaining power. You can see that ekdam se, if the janta is angry, if the audience is angry, suddenly something will happen in the nation, and the concentration of the entire nation will shift. Maybe the government does it intentionally to be in power, to pacify us, or to distract us. Okay, let's continue. Let it load. All right, let's move on to the next page. Now, what is I'm just adding few more terms here. First is standardization and pseudo individualization. Although culture industry term is the most important, but you should know these terms also. Standardization, which is mass produced cultural products follow predictable formulas. Example, romantic movies have the same narrative structure. A boy and a girl desperately in love cannot marry because of the pressure of the family or society, right? They are different romantic movies, but they work on the same structure or formula, that is standardization. And next is pseudo individualization, which is consumers are encouraged to believe that they are choosing something unique, but in reality, the differences are extremely superficial. The best example of pseudo individualization are the different models of iPhones. You know, every year, every time they launch a new model, believe me, it's superficial. There is no difference. It's just the packaging difference, but they'll tell you the camera is different, blah, 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 blah. And these concepts explain why Adorno and Horkheimer were deeply skeptical about commercial popular culture. Now, Stuart Hall's response to the Frankfurt School, you should know this. You know, Adorno and Horkheimer viewed audiences as passive. They just told that, for the ruling party to be in power, they will try to pacify the consumers. But Hall disagreed. What did Hall say? Active consumers, right? Encoding, decoding model. Hall said that audiences actively interpret media text, and therefore, culture studies borrows the Frankfurt School's critique of capitalist culture. It rejects that audiences are passive. Remember this. What does culture study borrow from Frankfurt School? Critique of capitalist culture, but it rejects the idea that consumers are passive. This difference is very important. So now come whatever we've learned till now, let's do a revision. Gramsci says power works through consent, that is hegemony. Althusser says ideology creates subject, and the ruling party rules through ISA, RSA, and interpellation. Adorno and Horkheimer said that capitalism, mass produced culture. They spoke of culture industry. And then Hall versus Frankfurt School. Of course, Hall said audiences are active, not passive. And now come to part 5, which is structuralism and post-structuralism in cultural studies. Wow. I feel so enlightened when I talk like this. I know, so do you. Listen, the question is how does ideology actually travel through culture? That is, how can an advertisement or a film or a fashion trend or a sporting event or even an ordinary photograph communicate political meanings without openly discussing politics? To answer these questions, cultural studies borrowed important ideas from structuralism and later from structuralism. Two thinkers that we will discuss under this part are Roland Barthes and Michel Foucault. Both of them, Barthes and Foucault, transformed the study of literature, media, and culture, but their approach was very different. First, talk about Barthes, from science to myths. Who was Barthes? He was a French literary critic. Although he began as a structuralist, Barthes later was thought to be a bridge of structuralism to post structuralism. But whenever a question comes, you have to call him a structuralist. Okay. Barthes said that popular culture is never innocent. Popular culture is never innocent. An advertisement is selling me something, it has a political ideology behind it. A food is giving me the benefits. A fashion trend is telling me that I will look more fashionable with this product, but everything has a hidden political meaning through it. To understand Barthes better, we must first understand semiotics, or the study of signs. Semiotics is the study of signs and signification. Barthes builds upon the work of Saussure here. Barthes continues the work of Saussure, Ferdinand de Saussure, who was a who was a Swiss linguist. You know, what did Saussure say? Saussure said that every linguistic sign consists of two parts. First is the signifier, which is the physical form, that is a tree. Tree, I say tree, that is the signifier. Second part is signified, the concept that associated with the sign. The moment I hear the word tree, what comes in my mind? Oh, green leaves, branches, trunk, right? Nobody, you know, taught me that a tree should look like this, but because since my childhood I have been hearing this is a tree, this is a tree, so the signifier is the real tree that I see. Signified is the concept or the idea that enters my mind after listening to that signifier, right? Or after seeing that signifier. Now, Barthes accepted this model, but he asked a bigger question. He says that what happens after the first meaning is established? Can signs acquire additional cultural meanings? And his answer was yes. And this led him to develop his most famous concept of myth. Myth. What is myth? It is the second layer of meaning. You know, when Barthes uses the word myth, he does not denote the ancient stories about gods. No. Barthes literally means, for Barthes, myth is the second order system of signification. I'll give you very good example here. Luxury watch. These days, Jaipur Watch Company. The moment Modi has worn it, Jaipur Watch Company is everywhere. I know, you must have also seen its ad in passing. It has these dials of old pesas, or related to Indian tigers, the Royal Bengal tiger, many things. Like the Jaipur Watch Company now is more than a brand. So here, take an example of Jaipur Watch Company. Imagine an advertisement of a luxury watch. At first level, watch obviously is what? Watch is the signifier here, right? Watch is the signifier. Signified, what comes in my brain? Oh, the device which tells time. But myth associated with this is watch. If you wear this particular brand, you will look successful. Your power, success, elegance, and social prestige will increase. Now, after believing in this myth, watch no longer functions only for telling time. It becomes a symbol of success. And this second cultural meaning is what Barthes called myth. Myth naturalizes ideology. Please connect Gramsci's idea of hegemony here. Gramsci explained how people accept dominant ideas, and Barthes explains how these ideas are communicated through signs and symbols. Now, come to PYQ ideas. Obviously, questions come from this. Who wrote mythologies? You have to connect myth, mythology with Barthes now. Remember it forever. Mythologies of 1957 was written by Roland Barthes. And whenever you also hear second order signification connected with myth, and which thinker explains how ideology is hidden within everyday cultural objects, again the answer is Barthes. Barthes, under his Mythologies of 1957, wrote professional essays on topics like wrestling, soap, toys, magazines, photographs. Imagine, Barthes wrote essays on these trivial topics. Why? His purpose was revolutionary. He wanted to prove that ordinary cultural practices deserve the same serious analysis as canonical literary text. If I can talk of Shakespeare, I should talk of the current soap opera that is literally, oh, I can tell you that serial that my mother in law and your mother in laws or your mothers must be really dying for. What is the name of that? A say? A serial which comes A. Oh God. Everyone loves it. It has given a new ideology in females' brains. Annapurna. No. Aparna. If you know what I'm talking about, there's this serial, which should be studied as much as Shakespeare. I'll tell you in a while. Chalo, let's move on now. Now, understand how mythologies resemble so much with the Birmingham School. Because Hogarth said, study everyday life. Raymond Williams said, culture is ordinary. And Barthes also said that even the smallest cultural object carries ideology. Now, who wrote Death of the Author? Please connected with Barth. Barth wrote the essay The Death of the Author. He said that once a text enters a public sphere, meaning no longer belongs exclusively to the author. This idea later influenced reader response criticism, and also it complements with Stuart Hall's arguments about active audiences. Okay. But here, a net examination tip for you guys. Please do not confuse death of the author with author function. Death of the author is connected to Roland Barthes. Author function is connected with Michel Foucault. So now we are in a good position to start with Foucault. After Roland Barthes, I come to Foucault and his ideas on power, knowledge, and discourse. Who was Michel Foucault? A French philosopher, historian of ideas, and a post structuralist thinker. Foucault asked, who decides what is truth? Why certain ideas are accepted as knowledge while others are dismissed? Who has the authority to define sanity, that this is sane, this is insane? Who has the authority to define criminality, sexuality, or normality? These questions transformed cultural studies forever. First concern of Michel Foucault is power and knowledge. According to Michel Foucault, power and knowledge are inseparable. This is power and knowledge. One cannot exist without the other. Power and knowledge has to be together. Listen, traditional theories imagined power as something possessed only by the governments or kings or dictators. But according to Foucault, power is everywhere, even in institutions like hospitals, prisons, universities, schools, families, religious institutions. In fact, language also holds power, right? Power is not merely repressive, it is productive. This is what Michel Foucault said. It is power that creates knowledge and identity. It is power that creates categories through which we understand ourselves. Power does not merely prohibit, power produces reality. So, after studying power and knowledge, now talk about discourse by Foucault. Discourse means conversation, but according to Foucault, discourse does not mean simply conversation. For Foucault, discourse refers to the entire system of language, ideas, institutions, and practices through which knowledge is produced. What is discourse? The entire system through which knowledge is produced. Now, for example, very good example here. Centuries ago, mental illness was connected with demonic presence. If somebody showed mental illness, people said, iske andar koi bhoot ghus gaya hai. But these days, we have moved beyond the demonic presence. These days, we understand it through psychiatry and medicines, right? So the individuals are the same. That is, the mental illness is the same, but the discourse has changed. The entire system and the practice through which knowledge is produced has changed. Similarly, Foucault said ideas about crime, sexuality, gender, childhood education have also changed across history because discourses surrounding them have changed. And therefore, for cultural studies, discourse is very crucial because it explains how meanings are historically constructed rather than naturally given. In culture studies, what does it say? Meanings are historically constructed from generation to generation. Maybe that is what is called generation gap rather than naturally taking it from one generation to the other. And now talk about discipline, surveillance, panopticon. Foucault further said that modern societies exercise power through discipline rather than force. How? Look, schools monitor students, factories monitor workers. Each individual start monitoring himself. Easiest example that Foucault gave us here is of Jeremy Bentham's panopticon. Jeremy Bentham gave a concept of panopticon where he said that panopticon is a circular prison where prisoners are aware that they are being watched from anywhere, anytime. It's a circular prison, and the prisoners are being watched continuously, but they don't know from where. But because the prisoners know that they are under surveillance, they start becoming more generous, they start becoming more disciplined, they start disciplining themselves. Okay? But this differs from Gramsci. Gramsci focuses on consent, Foucault focuses on discipline through surveillance. For both of them, They explain power, but in different ways. Wow. Now, what is biopower? Please listen. Traditional rulers exercised power mainly by deciding who should live, who should die. Modern states exercise power differently. How? They regulate population. Census. Abhi kitti bar people were coming to our houses to ask how many people live in your house. They even wrote something outside our house, right? Because right now that census, that taking of data, that what is the population of India is going on. So, the ruling party, it collects data, it promotes vaccination, it controls birth rates, it frames policies on sanitation, education, because more sanitized a city is, obviously people will live more, right? So, this regulation of life itself is what Foucault calls biopower. Nice. And now talk about author function. Remember, I told death of the author belongs to Roland Barthes. Author function belongs to Michel Foucault. Michel Foucault does not simply kill the author. He says that author functions as a cultural category that organizes text, determines authority, and regulates interpretation. See, please understand the difference. Barthes kills the author, but Foucault does not. Foucault says that author still functions in organizing the text, determining the authority, and regulating interpretation. Nice? So nice. Come on now, let's check these memory hooks. I hope you remember them. Connect these with Roland Barthes. Mythologies of 1957, then myth naturalizes ideology, then semiotics, which is the study of science, then death of the author. And now Michel Foucault. What will you connect with Michel Foucault? Tell me. Discourse. Then power and knowledge are inseparable. Then power is productive, not merely repressive. Then panopticon, that is surveillance and discipline. Then biopower, that is regulation of population. And then author function. Wow. With this, I'm done. I think we are done enough for the day. I'm starting with part 6 right now. I'm recording it, but then obviously you'll get it after a few days. So in this part, we've discussed so much. Please, just, try to absorb everything and see you in part 3 of cultural studies. If you loved it, obviously you're commenting and liking this video. This is Hina from Team Walla. Take very good care of yourself.